Hello, and welcome to the Heathen Trans Girl podcast with me, your host, Kaya Fox. How should one paraphrase the sea? Thus, by calling it Ymir's blood, husband of Ran, father of Aegir's daughters. Skáldskaparmál 33. So today we are talking about the personifications and deities of the sea from Norse mythology, being Aegir, his wife Ran, and their 9 daughters. This episode follows naturally from the last episode about Njord, who has associations with the sea, but almost more so associations with peace and prosperity. Now, my personal pet theory that I love, not in the lore, but I like it nonetheless, is that Njord is kind of related more to the shores and the fjords, the shallow seas, fishing, the fruitful waters, so to speak. And Aegir and Ran would then be related more to the deeper, wilder waters, the seas that could capsize ships. That's not to say you can't flip a boat in shallow waters, because I have definitely capsized a canoe in a lake before. Not super fun, but I think you get what I'm trying to say. There's like the safe shallow waters where you might, for example, like go to the beach and go swimming in the ocean, and where you can swim in the water is a little more tame than if you are out sailing in the middle of the ocean and get lost in a storm, and then you're like stuck in the middle of the Pacific. There seems to me anyway something a little bit more fearsome about the deep waters, the vast waters, the open ocean. Now this leads me to my point of Aegir and Ran both being considered Jotnar, or Jotuns. They are usually counted among the gods and goddesses. I have referred to them as deities. I see the distinction between Asir, Vanir, and Jotun as more along tribal lines, slightly different characters or like characteristics. So Njord, for example, being from the Vanir are usually more associated with fertility and prosperity and harvest. I typically view the Asir as a little more inclined towards civilization and knowledge, sometimes warfare. And the Jotun, for me, have a flavor of things slightly more animistic and natural, like natural forces. And I think in this discussion of Aegir and Ran, we can see that they are almost personifications of the sea itself, a little less embodied into human form, slightly more primal. Again, I refer to them all as just deities in general. Some people might want to call them spirits. I think that's a personal choice. I typically refer to more like localized and familial spirits as spirits. And I'm comfortable using the term deities for things that seem a little bigger, more broader, more universal. But again, that is my personal distinction. Draw lines where you want. Just maybe take a look at the idea of Jotun, what that means to you, and if you're comfortable working with approaching deities that might be a little more on the primal side. Again, totally up to you. Very quick anecdote before we jump into discussing all the attestations and reading through them. So I work on a wharf down by the ocean, and the other week the ocean flooded. It was like up on top of the wharf into the parking lot and everything. And it was a little bit terrifying to see like the whole ocean raised multiple feet. And yeah, just made me appreciate the power that the sea has and how we can take it for granted. Wanting the sea to stay in its place. Like we have no control over what the ocean does. And I think that is some of the quality that comes out in reading through these attestations is just the power of the ocean in general. So without further ado, let's jump into the lore. The sources we're going to be reading from today are the Poetic Edda, Henry Adams Bellows translation from 1936, the Prose Edda, Arthur Gilchrist Brodeur translation from 1916, and Friðþjófs saga, translated by Margaret Ross in 2017. We have 12 different attestations to read through, and they will all be listed down in the show notes as always. Our first reading comes from Skáldskaparmál, chapter 33, or 25 in the Larrington translation, in the Prose Edda translated by Brodeur. And this is one of different kennings for the sea, or poetic ways to refer to the sea. And in it we see the ocean being personified as Aegir himself, as well as a list of their 9 daughters. So, how should one paraphrase the sea? Thus by calling it Ymir's blood, visitor of gods, husband of Ran, father of Aegir's daughters, of them who are called Hymiskviða, Dufa, Blóðgara, Hefring, Udr, Hron, Bilgja, Bara, Kolga, land of Ran and of Aegir's daughters. And then skipping ahead a little bit, we have Snorri referencing older poems or older poets. So, even as Steen sang, when the fallow fell walls whirlwinds wove o'er the waves full fiercely, and Aegir's storm-glad daughters tore, of grim frost begotten. So to modernize that English for you real quick, when the fallow fell walls whirlwinds, so when the barren mountain whirlwinds wove over the waves fiercely, and Aegir's storm-glad daughters tore, born of grim frost. And then next, and as Refr sang, Gymir's wet cold spae-wife wiles the bear of twisted cables oft into Aegir's wide jaws, where the angry billow breaketh. Of all of the attestations, I think that teeny little poem right there is one of my favorite ones. I love the language. I'm going to break it down again for you real quick. So Gymir is another name of Aegir. So Gymir's wet, cold spae-wife. Spae translates as like prophecy or foretelling. This would be related to like the vulva or the seeress, some type of prophecy. So Aegir's wet, cold wife of prophecy. Wiles, the bear of twisted cables. Bear of twisted cables is a way to refer to a ship. So Gymir's wet, cold wife of prophecy manipulates the ship oft into Aegir's wide jaws, where the angry billow breaketh. Ah, it's just so good. Okay, next one. It is said here that Aegir and Gymir are both the same, and he sang further. And the sea peak Sleipnir slitteth, the stormy breast rain-driven, the wave with red stain running out of white Ran's mouth. My modern translation. The ship, it tears its stormy breast, rain-beaten, with red stain running through the waves and out of the white mouth of Ran. And then the last little bit in this chapter. And Snæbjörn sang, they say 9 brides of skerries move swiftly over the sea churn. Skerries are rocky reefs or sea stacks. So they say 9 brides of the rocky reefs swiftly move the sea churn. Next in the attestations, we are moving on to 2 different stories of heroes from the Poetic Edda. The first one being Helgakviða Hjörvarðssonar, chapter 18 from the Poetic Edda, Bellows translation. Now this section of Helgakviða Hjörvarðssonar has Atli, the hero Helgi's friend, speaking to a female Jotun in the flighting style. So Atli spake, "Which in front of the ship thou wast, and lay before the fjord, to Ran wouldst have given the ruler's men if a spear had not struck thy flesh." So here we have reference of the sea dead being given to Ran. The next attestation is a similar scenario. So it comes from Helgakviða Hundingsbana, the first one, stanzas 26 through 30, Poetic Edda, Bellows translation. So in this passage, the Valkyrie Sigrun helps to save Helgi's ships from Ran and Aegir's daughters. The ship's tents soon the chieftain struck, and waked the throng of warriors all. The heroes the red of dawn beheld, and on the masts the gallant men made fast the sails in Varinsfjord. There was a beat of oars and clash of iron, shield smote shield, as the ship's folk rowed. Swiftly went the warrior-laden fleet of the ruler forth from the land. So did it sound when together the sisters of Kolga struck with the reefs full long, as if cliffs were broken with beating surf. Helgi bade higher hoist the sails, nor did the ship's folk shun the waves, though dreadfully did Aegir's daughters seek the steeds of the sea to sink. But from above did Sigrun brave aid the men and all their faring. Mightily came from the claws of Ran the leader's sea beast, off Gnipalund. Now these heroes and warriors are going to a great battle with human adversaries, but first they have to fight this battle with the waves and the sea itself. Very evocative imagery. I love that passage. And now that we've had a little taste of the wildness of the sea and some of this very poetic language that refers to the sea in Norse, in the Norse mindset and cosmos, we're going to jump over to some more narrative-driven readings, being those of Aegir and Aegir's Hall and the feasts that were hosted. So first we have a quick reference in Grímnismál 45 of the Poetic Edda, Bellows translation, in which Grímnir, Odin in disguise, is orating and says, "To the race of the gods my face have I raised, and the wished-for aid I have waked. For to all the gods has the message gone that sit in Aegir's seats, that drink within Aegir's doors." And then proceeding from there, we have a quick story about the getting of the cauldron and then different feasts with Aegir. So the getting of the cauldron from Hymiskviða 1 through 5, and then one more at 40 from the Poetic Edda, Bellows translation. Of old the gods made feast together, and drink they sought, ere sated they were. Twigs they shook, and blood they tried. Rich fare in Aegir's hall they found. The mountain dweller, Aegir, sat merry as boyhood, but soon like a blinded man he seemed. The son of Ig, Ig being Odin, son of Ig being Thor, gazed in his eyes. For the gods a feast shalt thou forthwith get. The word wielder, Thor, toil for the giant worked, and so revenge on the gods he sought. He bade Sif's mate, Thor, the kettle bring. Therein for ye all much ale shall I brew. So my quick breakdown of that passage, the gods wanted to feast and drink, so they did some various divination practices and found that Aegir's hall would be a fantastic place for feasting. They then, or Thor and Tyr then went to Aegir, demanding that Aegir host a feast for them. And Aegir, a little bit grumpy about it, says that first they have to go get a cauldron in which that much ale may be brewed. The far-famed ones could find it not, and the holy gods could get it nowhere, till in truthful wise did Tyr speak forth, and helpful counsel to Thor gave. There dwells, to the east, Hymir the wise, at the end of heaven, a kettle my father fierce doth own, a mighty vessel, a mile deep. And then we have a fantastic and very long story about Tyr and Thor going to get Hymir's cauldron. They eat a ton, they go fishing for Jormungandr, they break a fancy goblet on Hymir's head, they get a super heavy cauldron, fight a bunch of giants, and bring it back. Stanza 40. The mighty one came to the council of gods, and the kettle he had, that Hymir's was. So gladly their ale the gods could drink in Aegir's hall at the autumn time. Following then from that, we have the introduction to Lokasenna in the Poetic Edda, Bellows translation. Aegir, who is also called Gymir, had prepared ale for the gods, after he had got the mighty kettle, as has now been told. To this feast came Odin and Frigg, his wife. Thor came not, as he was on a journey in the east. Sif, Thor's wife, was there, and Brag, with Idun, his wife. Tyr, who had but one hand, was there, for the wolf Fenrir had bitten off his other hand when they had bound him. There were Njord and Skadi, his wife, Freyr and Freya, and Vidar, the son of Odin. Loki was there, and Freyr's servants, Bygvir and Bela. Many were there of the gods and elves. Aegir had 2 serving men, Fimafang and Eldir. Glittering gold they had in place of firelight. The ale came in of itself, and great was the peace. The guests praised much the ability of Aegir's serving men. Now, jumping from the Poetic Edda over to the Prose Edda, we see a little bit of a difference in storyline if we're trying to follow a chronological storyline. Whereas in the Poetic Edda, we had the getting of the cauldron being pretty much immediately followed by what I'll refer to as the Lokasenna feast. Over in the Prose Edda, Snorri describes a trading of feasts, more or less. And I'll just go ahead and read it, and I think it'll be self-explanatory. This first one I have dubbed Sword Light Party from Skáldskaparmál 1, Prose Edda, Brodeur translation. A certain man was named Aegir, or Hler. He went on the island which is now called Hler's Island, and was deeply versed in black magic. He took his way to Asgard, but the Aesir had foreknowledge of his journey. He was received with good cheer, and yet many things were done by deceit, with eye illusions. And at evening, when it was time for drinking, Odin had swords brought into the hall, so bright that light radiated from them, and other illumination was not needed while they sat at drinking. Then the Aesir came in to their banquet, and in the high seat sat them down those 12 Aesir who were appointed to be judges. These were their names: Thor, Njord, Freyr, Tyr, Heimdallr, Bragi, Vidar, Vali, Ullr, Honir, Forseti, Loki. And in like manner the Asynjur: Frigg, Freya, Gefjun, Idun, Gerður, Sigyn, Fulla, Nanna. It seemed glorious to Aegir to look about him in the hall. The wainscoting were all hung with fair shields. There was also stinging mead copiously quaffed. The man seated next to Aegir was Bragi, and they took part together in drinking and in converse. Bragi told Aegir of many things which had come to pass among the Aesir. Skipping then to Skáldskaparmál 41, or 33 in the Larrington translation, we have the Gold Light Party. Aegir went to Asgard to feast, but when he was ready to return home, he invited Odin and all the Aesir to visit him in 3 months' time. There is another long list of names that I'm going to skip because we've just read those over twice. When the gods had sat down in their places, straightway Aegir had bright gold brought in onto the floor of the hall, and the gold gave forth light and illumined the hall like fire, and it was used there for lights at his banquet, even as in Valhall swords were used in place of fire. Then Loki bandied sharp words with all the gods and slew one of Aegir's thralls, him who was called Five-Finger. Another of his thralls was named Fire-Kindler. Ran is the name of Aegir's wife, and their daughters are 9, even as we have written before. At this feast things were self-served, both food and ale, and all implements needful to the feast. Then the Aesir became aware that Ran had that net wherein she was wont to catch all men who go upon the sea. Now this tale is to show whence it comes that gold is called fire, or light, or brightness of Aegir, of Ran, or of Aegir's daughters. And now such use is made of these metaphors that gold is called fire of the sea, and of all the names of the sea, even as Aegir or Ran had their names associated with the sea. Now therefore gold is called fire of waters, or of rivers, and of all river names. So in this passage we hear tell of Aegir's association with gold, fire, light, which may be indicative of the wealth of the sea on whole. I mean, if you think about all these Viking raids coming back with wealth and treasure, they risk it all if their ship is overturned. And where does all the gold and the treasure go except to the bottom of the ocean, which may be Aegir and Ran's domain? We also have the mention with very little context whatsoever that the Aesir learn of Ran's net in which she catches or tries to catch those who go out to sea. In this next passage, Snorri clearly includes Ran in a list of the other Asynjur, the goddesses. So this next one comes from Skáldskaparmál, Prose Edda, and this is the Nafnaþulur portion of Skáldskaparmál, which is basically like the list portion. So 23 through 24 in the Nafnaþulur section of Skáldskaparmál. Now shall the goddesses all be named, Frigg and Freya, Fulla and Snotra, Gerður and Gefjun, Gna, Lofn, Skadi, Jord, and Idun, Ilmr, Bil, Njorun, Hlin and Nanna, Nos, Rindr, Sjofen, Sol, and Saga, Sigyn, and Vor. There is Var and Sin needs to be named, and Thrúðr and Ran are enumerated next after them. Next we have a couple mentions of Ran's net. They come from two different passages, but say almost exactly the same thing, referring to the same story. So the first one is from the intro to Grímnismál in the Poetic Edda, Bellows translation. Then they sent Loki to get the gold. He went to Ran and got her net, and went then to Andvari Falls, and cast the net in front of the pike, and the pike leapt into the net. The next passage comes from Regin's Tale in Volsunga Saga. This is the Morris and Magnusson translation. I'll read the whole thing, or a little more of the intro, so you get some context. And so it befell that Odin, Loki, and Honir, as they went on their ways, came to Andvari's force. And Otter had taken a salmon, and ate it slumbering upon the river bank. Then Loki took a stone, and cast it at Otter, so that he got his death thereby. The gods were well content with their prey, and fell to flaying off the otter's skin, and in the evening came to Reidmar's house, and showed him what they had taken. Thereon he laid hands on them, and doomed them to such ransom as they should fill the otter skin with gold, and cover it over, without and within, with red gold. So they sent Loki to gather gold for them. He came to Ran, and got her net, and went therewith to Andvari's force, and cast the net before the pike, and the pike ran into the net and was taken. Now, without giving away too many spoilers, because I highly recommend reading Volsung Saga. It is so good. Ran's net ends up being a crucial part of getting a vast amount of gold that later becomes the curse of a dragon and the wealth of a hero, and carries on the story very far. So it may seem like a small thing, the borrowing of Ran's net, but this net is used in effect to catch this vast amount of wealth that leads to so many things happening. So we saw before a connection between gold being used to light the halls of Aegir, and here we have Ran's net being used to capture wealth. So there again is this association between the sea and wealth. All right, we're doing good. We only have 2 more attestations to go. The first one is one of more very pretty Kennings, and the second is the story of a storm at sea. So the Kennings come from Skáldskaparmál 76 or 61 in the Larrington translation, from the Poetic Edda Brodeur translation. First, there is another mention of the poem that showed up in the Prose Edda towards the beginning of this episode. Wintry one's wet cold spae wife wiles the bear of twisted cables oft into Aegir's wide jaws, where the angry billow breaketh. And then skipping ahead a little bit, there are other names for the sea, such as it is proper to use in paraphrasing ships or gold. Ran, it is said, was Aegir's wife, even as is written here. To the sky shot up the deep skleeds, with fearful might the sea surged. Methinks our stems the clouds cut. Ran's road to the moon soared upward. That first line, to the sky shot up the deep skleeds, is referencing the deeps. Skleeds are like kites or birds of prey. So that is actually a poetic way to refer to waves, sometimes referring to the waves themselves as birds, be it swans or birds of prey. It's this feathered flying thing of power. So to the sky shot up the waves, with fearful might the sea surged. I think our stems, like our masts, cut the clouds. Ron's road to the moon soared upward. And Ron's road here being the ocean itself soared up to the moon. It's so good. It's so good. Okay, proceeding. The daughters of Aegir and Ron are 9, and their names are recorded here. Oh, sorry if I said the Brodeur translation earlier. This is the Bellows translation, and as I read the 9 names, I will provide Bellows' translation of those names. Hymiskviða, that through which one can see the heaven. Dufa, the pitching one. Blórugara, bloody hair. Hefring, riser. Udr, frothing wave. Ron, welling wave. Bylgja, billow. Drofen, foam-flecked. Kolga, the cool one. The chapter then continues. Einar Skulason recorded the names of 6 of them in this stanza, beginning, Hymiskviða sternly stirreth, and fiercely the sea's wailing. Welling wave, as Valgardr sang. Foam rested in the sea's bed, swollen with wind, the deep played, and the welling waves were washing the awful heads of the warships. Billow, as Ottar the swarthy sang. Ye sheer with shaven rudder, billows moisty deep, the broad sheet, which girls spun on the masthead with the rollers reindeer sported. Foam-flecked, as Ormur sang. The hawk-like heedful lady has every virtue, Lofen of the foamed flecks flame gold, faithful as a friend, all faults renounceth. Wave-born, as Thorlikr the fair sang. The sea walls and the wave-born bears bright froth o'er the red wood, where gapes the roller's brown ox with mouth gold ornamented. Shoal, as Einar sang. Nor meet the forward-minded, where the fierce sea on our friends falls. I think the shoal becalmed not the ship, wood of the waters. Fullness, as Refr sang. Downward the fells of fullness fall on the bear of tackle. Now, forward winterling stirreth the ship on Glamis sea path. Comer, or the ominous forebodder, as here. The comber fell headlong o'er me, the main called me home unto it. I accepted not the sea's bidding. Breaker, as Ottar sang. In burst the ship's sides thin, rushed the breaker downward, flushed stood the wind, bane of the wood. Men endured wild tempest then. And there ends the specific kennings for Aegir, Ran, and their daughters. But it could be argued that any poetic reference to the sea or to the waves of the sea are referencing Aegir, Ran, and their daughters. Our last and final attestation of the day comes from Friðþjófs saga, stanzas 7 through 13, as translated by Margaret Ross, a story in which Friðþjóf and his men find themselves in a storm at sea. Alden cannot be seen. We have come westwards into the ocean. The whole sea seems to me as if it were alive with glowing coals. Towering waves topple down. Swan flights build up a mound. Now Elidi is tossed in a furious roller. My ship is taking on a great deal of water. The young woman will sob if I must sink in the hillside of swans. Although bed linen lay a-bleaching somewhat, bawling has taken place on board Elidi. I sat on a cushion in Baldershagi. I recited what I knew before the daughter of a king. Now I must tread the testing bed of Ran. But another will tread the bed of Ingibor. Both sides of the bow broke apart in the enormous wave of the ocean. 4 men sank into the deep sea. Now the sea has destroyed 4 of our comrades who should have lived. But Ran, immoral woman, provides benches and bed for the brave fellows. That gold-red ring, which the wealthy father of Halfdan owned, must be cut up before the sea can destroy us. Gold must be visible on guests if we need accommodation in the middle of Ran's hall. That is fitting for men of splendor. So here we have another beautiful description of a storm, as well as mentioning the sea and the storm itself as the testing bed of Ran. The mention that Ran provides bench and bed for the brave fellows drowned at sea. And the mention that gold be visible on gifts if they need accommodation in the middle of Ran's hall. And that brings us to the end of the episode. I would like to thank everyone who listened and hope you got something out of today's episode, if nothing but the sheer enjoyment of hearing some old poetry read. If you're listening here on Spotify, give the show a like and be sure to join next week as we are talking about the Oseberg ship burial. Absolutely fascinating Viking Age historical find. We get to talk about ships. We get to talk about burial practices. I'm very much looking forward to it and hope you will join me then.